Date is at 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer continues next on AM 560. The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. What is going on with air travel in this country? There seemed to be a rash of mishaps of late, and obviously mishaps when you're talking about airplanes is a dicey business.
Well, yeah, United Airlines had 5 incidents in less than a week, all with Boeings, different makes and models. And then you had the Alaska Airlines flight, the panel flew off, tires are falling off. Don't feel good about traveling right now.
Hey, boss, your tire just rolled off. It's rolling down the runway behind
Crashed
you.
into a parked car. They're lucky it didn't kill somebody.
And this is against the backdrop of this government whistleblower retaliation suit that former Boeing safety engineer John Burnett was pursuing. He was providing a deposition in Charleston, South Carolina, though he's based in Louisville. And he was set to go back for day 3 of the deposition in the case when he didn't show up. And attorneys reached out to the hotel where he was staying to check on him. And the staff at the hotel found him dead of a gunshot wound in his truck in the parking lot.
And they're saying it's suicide, but I'm not buying that.
Well,
why would you commit suicide during the middle of your depositions? You don't do that. Who does that? It's just very bizarre to me.
It is strange, and the lawyers sort of said as much, although his brother Rodney Barnett told the Associated Press that his brother John was suffering from PTSD and anxiety attacks as a result of being subjected to the hostile work environment at Boeing, which we believe led to his death. So that's the family's perspective. So they knew maybe things weren't what they seemed with John, although, again, the attorneys told Time magazine he was in very good spirits and really looking forward to putting this phase of his life behind him and moving on. We didn't see any indication he would take his own life. No one can believe it, but it seemed like his brother sort of did believe it. That was reporting by Clive Irving over at the Daily Beast, and we'll get to him in a second for more on this, but here was a sum of what John Barnett had provided in public testimony, because since his retirement from Boeing in 2017, he had been very public about his criticism of Boeing cutting corners when it came to safety.
One, this is not a 737 problem. It's a Boeing problem. And I know the FAA's gone in and they've done due diligence and inspections to assure that the door plugs of the 737 are installed properly and the fasteners are torqued properly. But my concern is, what's the rest of the airplane? What's the rest of the condition of the airplane? And the reason my concern for that is, back in 2012, Boeing started removing inspection operations off their jobs. So it left the mechanics to buy off their own work. So what we're seeing with the door plug blowout is what I've seen with the rest of the airplane, as far as jobs not being completed properly, inspection steps being removed, issues being ignored. My concerns are with the 737 and the 787, because those programs have really embraced the theory that quality is overhead and non-value added. So those two programs have really put a strong effort into removing quality from the process. When I first started working at Charleston, I was in charge with pushing back defects to our suppliers. And what that meant was I'd take a group of inspectors and actually go to the supplier and inspect their product before they sent it in. Well, I'd taken a team of 4 inspectors to Spirit Aerosystems to inspect the 41 section before they sent it to Charleston. And we found 300 defects. Some of them were significant that needed engineering intervention. When I returned to Charleston, my senior manager told me we had found too many defects, and he was going to take the next trip. So the next trip he went on, he took 2 of my inspectors. And when they got back, they were given accolades for only finding 50 defects. So I pulled that inspector aside and I said, did Spirit really clean up their act that quick? That don't sound right. And she was mad. She said, no. Said the 2 inspectors were given 2 hours to inspect the whole 41 section, and they were kicked off the airplane.
So obviously what he's arguing there is it's a culture problem, as you heard him say at the outset of that clip. For more on this, Clive Irving is a columnist for the Daily Beast, senior consulting editor at Condé Nast Traveler, specializing in aviation. He's also the author of Jumbo, The Making of the Boeing 747, and most recently, The Last Queen, Elizabeth II's 70-year reign, a 70-year battle to save the House of Windsor, that is. The Last Queen and Jumbo, The Making of Boeing 747. Clive Irving, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome, and it's a very, very sad commentary about John Barnett, because one of the ironies of the situation is that he didn't really need to say anything else, because the case he made has been amply proved by all the reporting of the problems at the 787 plant in North Charleston. But there's a much larger issue here, which is that when I wrote the book about the creation of the 747, that was 20 years ago, I was lucky enough to interview all the great engineers who had created the jet age from 1959 onward. This was a cadre of exceptional men, and they were responsible for the fact that the whole world regarded Boeing as peerless, that in fact the word Boeing became a synonym for any jet, that people would all around the world just look up in the sky and say Boeing. And now we've got to this wretched situation where the company's standing has been, in the 4 years that this man, Dave Calhoun, has been running it, the company has been absolutely plagued by one crisis after another, all involving quality. And what does this man say as an explanation for what's going on? He uses this terrible management speak phrase, quality escape. What's escaped in Boeing is any attention to the standing and the stature of one of this nation's greatest companies, with one of the most astonishing technical achievements over the last 50 years. And it's now got to a situation where Calhoun says it's unlikely that they'll create any new plane in this decade, and that means that it would probably be until 2035 or 2040 before they could produce a single new one. So what does that do to the commercial standing of the company? It means that they basically surrendered the future to their great competitor Airbus. So on the simple basis of making money in the long term, he's failed, and in the simple basis of destroying the reputation of the company in the short term, he's certainly succeeded.
Well, is part of it as the cultural shift a reflection of the shift in revenue streams? So my understanding is that the Defense Space and Security Unit at Boeing has overtaken commercial airplanes as the largest revenue source. So maybe there is.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
Is that an important part of the story?
Well, I think psychologically, for these men who at the top of the company, whose interest is really short term and returning the greatest amount of money to the shareholders themselves that they can, that's absolutely true. So what you're really describing is an attitude of low priority. But I mean, it's one thing to take a spreadsheet view of the whole Boeing works and decide that the real money is in the defense and aerospace section. Mind you, they're just as incompetent in those divisions as they are in the commercial aircraft division, because they have in the military division, they have constant overruns. They break the budgets, and the same is true in aerospace. That Elon Musk's company is the only one really out there that delivers on time and on budget. And it used to be that Boeing was as prominent in the aerospace business as it was in the in the space business as it was in the aerospace business, and they're not. They've lost their reputation there too. So overall, it's a very worrying situation. the John Barnett case, which is obviously very tragic, just reflects the atmosphere that confronts anyone who wanted to raise a red flag in what was going on in the plants. And people I've talked to in Seattle, veterans say that Barnett's the most tragic and egregious example of what they do. What they do is, when someone pops up and says, "I'm concerned about this," they immediately start burying them in threats of litigation. And they can bury somebody with very few personal resources in very expensive litigation for a very long time. So that creates an intimidating situation inside the company. Moreover, they're very arrogant. At this moment, with the inquiry going on about the blown-out door, where it's astonishing that 4 bolts that were supposed to be holding the door in place were left out. During the course of that inquiry now, they're refusing to hand over details to the National Transportation Safety Board.
Yeah, but why is Boeing cutting corners when they know they're putting lives at risk? I mean, look at the 737 MAX 9 and those 2 crashes. I mean, why would they do that?
Well, yes. I mean, that's how do you answer that question? Well, they're showing what they've done is stripped away layers. As John Barnett was saying, they took people off the lines whose job it was to carry out the last stage of inspection. So when the plane went out the door, everybody building the plane had confidence that they were sending a plane out that was entirely safe. And Barnett himself said that he never felt that any plane that went out of the door in North Charleston was entirely safe. You hear engineers from the 737 MAX program, a very plagued program, saying they would never themselves fly on a 737 MAX. I mean, you can't get greater condemnation than that.
Is there anything you said that Barnett was already said everything he had to say, really, but I mean, just because of the surprise of his suicide, that didn't seem to be. I mean, maybe as again per your reporting and what his brother said, maybe there was some signs, but clearly not to the extent that anybody believed that would occur. Was there anything else? Do you know that he had left to say about Boeing that would have been particularly damaging, that may cast this suicide in a different light?
Well, that's a good question, and obviously I don't have access to his depositions in the 2 days that he gave his story. But I don't see any. First of all, I can't think that there could be anything any more damning than he'd already said, and that we already know. That's the mystery. So, and I think it's impossible for us to understand the psychological situation that it was enduring.
Yeah. Well, so then on Boeing, I mean, Boeing is a supplier to a lot of commercial carriers. So I mean, what is your net from the reporting you've done going back 2 decades, and what we know about what's happening in Boeing, and what John Barnett said about what's happening in Boeing, and the senior officials you talked to in Seattle? So what's our understanding of the safety of air travel, the safest form of transportation, at present, certainly still?
Yeah, well, it's an extremely safe form of travel, and of course that's a result of decades of learning from crashes and creating aircraft now which can virtually fly themselves. And that brings me back to the 737 MAX, which is that early around when a guy called Jim McNerney was the chief executive officer of Boeing, and he was schooled in the very ruthless, cost-cutting philosophy of Jack Welch at General Electric, as Calhoun, the current CEO, was. There's this line of people that were recruited who had backgrounds from GE and their ruthless cost-cutting. They don't seem to understand that when you're cutting costs on producing refrigerators or other domestic appliances or anything that GE did, it doesn't put lives at risk. As soon as you start cost-cutting in manufacturing aircraft, of course, as we see now, it does put lives at risk. So what happened in the early part, the last modern plane that they created was 20 years ago, the 787, which in many ways was a brilliant technological breakthrough, and one that is very safe and until you find out what's going on in the production plant, and then you begin to wonder whether it is that safe, because you have to make a division between the production standards of the company and the actual concept of the aircraft. And what Boeing is suffering now is unique, I think, among any aircraft manufacturers, is that it's on the factory floor. It's at the very last point which determines whether the plane, when it goes out the hangar doors, is safe or not. It's at that point that the whole system is breaking down. So you've got a situation where from the moment that McNerney took over, this regime of cutting costs wherever they could be cut was instigated. Also, McNerney was the guy who decided not to produce an all-new single-aisle jet to compete with Airbus's A320 and A321, because it was much easier for them to make money by just adding another extension to this 737 is a 1968 design. I talked to some of the people who designed it originally, and they were aghast at what was going on now. And a lot of the problems with the 737 are that they're trying to stretch a plane that had already been stretched too far. For example, the FAA has yet to certify the largest model of this. This is another story to come up, I think, is that the largest 737 will carry 220 to 240 people inside that very narrow fuselage, which was designed in the 1960s. If you get into this thing, you'll feel a sense of a tunnel, and seats crammed together will give you a claustrophobic feeling. And so I started asking questions about whether they'd carried out the proper tests for cabin evacuation in crashes, because people are supposed to be able to get out of these planes under any circumstances, however bad, in 90 seconds, which in fact did happen very recently in a crash of an Airbus A350. But I had serious doubts about looking at the layout of this plane. And by the way, that door that blew out, that wasn't a door, was an emergency door that was put in that 737. If they stacked in this maximum number of seats, they had to have an extra door in it. So the largest model, the 10, which is still awaiting certification and won't probably get certification for a while yet, has to be fully tested on it, whether people can get out of it. And I'm not at all sure that they have tested it in that way. So there's another thing to worry about in the future if that plane ever gets to airlines, which I wonder whether it will.
But you're saying that this is a problem that's unique? I mean, it's not a problem at Airbus, at least not that we know of. It's a problem that's unique to Boeing's culture at a particular point in the production line, and ideally this attention, including from John Barnett, will force Boeing to make the changes that are necessary to be up to snuff safety wise, right? I mean, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, yes, it's become endemic now throughout every level of the production of these planes, clearly, and FAA supervision has been greatly increased, but I don't think sufficiently increased, because what you need is people right there rather than people checking paperwork about whether an inspection has been carried out. You actually need people, and I think the investigation of how that door blew out in the end will show a very bad and damning situation, and I don't see how this man Calhoun can survive in charge of this company any longer.
Clive Irving is a columnist for the Daily Beast, senior consulting editor at Condé Nast Traveler, specializing in aviation. He's also the author of Jumbo, The Making of the Boeing 747, which we were talking about, and more recently, The Last Queen, Elizabeth II's 70-year battle to save the House of Windsor. Clive Irving, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back sometime, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Federal authorities are now pressuring banks to spy on the transactions of conservatives. Hi, I'm Dr. Ron Paul, and this is yet another reason why you need a physical gold IRA